I was aware that the story of new universities and museums in the Gulf and the migrant labor that goes into their realization wasn't a straightforward one. Before working on this piece, I'd spent time in Dubai, Sharjah, and Abu Dhabi, and for every horror story that I'd heard about labor abuses, I knew there was a success story too. I knew that many families survived on the remittances made from work in the Gulf. Many of my own friends had grown up in the region, a hodgepodge of Iranians, Lebanese, Iraqis, Indians, and so on. The magazine I co-edit, which is called Badoon, owes a lot to Dubai as one of its earliest incubating grounds, but also as an endlessly interesting subject for discovery and debate. In other words, the narrative was more than a simple one about victims and perpetrators. But what especially drew me to this story, beyond the complexities I just alluded to, was the work of a group of artists and writers and academics organized under the deceptively straightforward rubric of the Gulf Labor Coalition, or Gulf Labor for short. I'd heard stories about their successes in clamoring for certain labor safeguards. Care of a multifaceted campaign, which included significant research and advocacy over the course of more than 5 years, the Gulf Labor Collective had managed to shine a light onto the mostly invisible manpower that goes into erecting, in this case, gargantuan temples of culture and education, a Guggenheim Museum, a branch of New York University, a Louvre, and so on. But first, to better understand the situation, I traveled to India, and specifically to Kerala, a southern Indian state whose fortunes have long been tied to those of the Gulf. In Kerala, it was impossible not to acknowledge the tremendous economic engine migration to the Gulf represents for this, but also other parts of the world. Along the NH-17, which is the long and skinny and perilous road that bisects the state of Kerala, one can't avoid the sight of grand Gulf homes. I put that in quotation marks. These homes, which look a little like elaborate wedding cakes, have been built, in most cases, thanks to the money sent back by men who've gone off to Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE to try their fortunes. Some of these homes have flourishes that appear to have been cribbed from the Arabian Nights. Others approximate pagodas or castles. Traces of the Gulf have seeped into popular local culture, too. Restaurants in Kerala advertise Sharjah sheikhs after the UAE emirate of that name, and women are perfumed by marhaba, a scent named after the Arabic word for welcome. An entire film industry has come to be which takes migration to the Gulf as its animating theme. You might even call it Gulfywood. Dubai-style billboards, which is to say huge, pop up in lush coconut groves, like objects dropped from the sky. After India, I traveled to Abu Dhabi, where a vast network of museums and universities was being built on an island called Saadiyat, which, in a PR-driven bastardization of Arabic, is sometimes referred to as Happiness Island. Over the course of several months, I negotiated this fabric of workers, activists, institutions, and governments. I tried to inhabit everyone's point of view, from the Gulf governments who sought to invest in world-class cultural institutions and universities, at least in part to plan for a post-oil future, to the workers who seek a better life for their families back home, to the institutions themselves, many of which, besides being offered significant sums of money, are truly invested in a dynamic vision of the global. And finally, there are the artist activists who recognize that they might hold unique leverage in this landscape. Herein was their innovation to the traditional human rights model. To paraphrase one of the key protagonists of the Gulf Labor Coalition, what is an art museum without art? What if high-profile artists withheld their artwork from museums in the Gulf until certain labor safeguards were ensured? What has transpired in the meantime is something akin to an opera of globalization, starring questing artists, slow-moving institutions, money-hungry architects, glory-seeking sheikhs, and desperate workers. The opera trades on certain stock gestures, cries of exploitation, denials, fervent expressions of good and bad faith, quixotic letters exchanged, etc. My hope in writing this piece was to sift through this colorful cast of characters, but also to move past the cliches. What ensued was nothing short of fascinating.